I run this floor, and I decide who gets escorted out." That was Lisa Clinton's final, arrogant declaration before publicly humiliating a customer, Mike Pierce, ordering security to remove him from the Chronos Luxe store. What she didn't know was chilling. Nobody in a plain t-shirt had come for one reason: to purchase a sentimental watch and quietly finalize his acquisition of the entire $500 million luxury chain. When Mike sent a single text, he wasn't calling for help. He was alerting the executive team he now commanded. Minutes later, the same woman who had barked orders at him was trembling as the doors opened, and the executives walked in to announce the truth she never saw coming. The store she ruled? The staff she threatened? The floor she claimed to own? None of it belonged to her anymore. The story is just getting interesting. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. The air inside Chronos Luxe was chilled to the precise temperature that guaranteed maximum clarity for the flawless, anti-reflective watch displays. It was the silence of expensive, polished stone, broken only by the soft, rhythmic hum of the ventilation system, the sound of money being preserved. Mike Pierce walked that silence with a quiet confidence that completely belied his clothes. A washed-out gray t-shirt and jeans that looked more comfortable on a construction site than a five-figure watch salon. He ignored the vast, shimmering walls of modern steel and sapphire crystal chronographs, his eyes fixed on the heritage section in the back. Specifically, a single, gold-cased 1960s Ethelred navigator in the corner of a dimly lit mahogany display. That watch wasn't about status. It was about the chipped porcelain hands and the scratch on the bezel he knew meant everything. It was his grandfather's watch, lost years ago and only recently tracked to this very boutique, where it was being listed as vintage rarity. That singular, emotional goal was the reason he was here, and it hardened his focus, making him oblivious to the hostile atmosphere he'd instantly generated. He reached the display, placing his hand on the polished marble counter that separated him from the timepiece. A shadow fell over the case, a scent of expensive Parisian perfume and starched cotton preceding it. The manager, Lisa Clinton, was a human embodiment of the store's pricing strategy, sharp, severe, and meticulously crafted to convey absolute superiority. Clad in an impeccable navy power suit, her blonde hair pulled back tightly, she had the kind of surgically precise smile that promised exceptional service only to those she deemed worthy. Her eyes, however, performed a swift, unforgiving calculation, moving from the $20 cotton of Mike's t-shirt to the dark color of his skin, and concluding, in less than a second, that he was a nuisance, not a client. Lisa was notorious among the staff for weeding out undesirables, anyone whose appearance didn't immediately scream generational wealth. "Can I help you, sir?" Lisa's voice was too controlled, the single word "sir" delivered with a lethal, patronizing politeness that was closer to a challenge. Mike turned to her, his expression neutral. "I'm interested in the Ethelred navigator, the one there in the corner display." Lisa's sharp, blue eyes narrowed slightly, sweeping across his attire again. Her perfectly manicured hand came to rest near the watch case, a proprietorial barrier. She didn't even look at the watch he indicated. She simply looked through Mike. "I see," she drawled, her tone dripping with unconcealed condescension. "That particular model is quite exclusive. It's a very high-end, vintage collector's piece. The price point is, shall we say, commensurate with its rarity." She paused, letting the implication hang. "Perhaps, sir, if you are new to collecting, we could guide you towards some of our entry-level contemporary pieces." She gestured vaguely toward a separate glass column across the room where the affordable $5,000 to $10,000 watches were placed. It wasn't an offer to help. It was a clear dismissal, a subtle but firm instruction to go look at the cheaper, more affordable options that matched her instant, prejudiced assessment of him. Mike didn't blink. He just stared back, his focus unwavering from the watch that represented his last physical connection to his grandfather. "I appreciate the suggestion, but I know exactly what I'm looking for," Mike said, his voice low and steady, refusing to take the bait. "I'd like to see the navigator now. Please." Mike held Lisa's gaze, his focus unwavering from the watch that represented his last physical connection to his grandfather. He knew he was disrupting her sense of control, and his polite insistence only aggravated her initial prejudice. "I appreciate the suggestion, but I know exactly what I'm looking for," Mike repeated, his voice still low and steady, refusing to take the bait. I'd like to see the navigator now. Please. Lisa's facade of strained professionalism shattered. A muscle twitched in her jaw. His calm was clearly interpreted as defiance, especially after her clear directive to stand down. She hated that his simple gray t-shirt and jeans masked a refusal to be intimidated. After a tense moment, she finally capitulated, her movement sharp and aggressive. Fine, she snapped, retrieving a set of slim, golden keys. She unlocked the mahogany display case, the tumblers clicking loudly in the pressurized silence of the boutique. She didn't use the microfiber cloth or the specialized tongs the employees were trained to use. Instead, she snatched the vintage gold timepiece by its strap, pulling it from its velvet cushion and laying it flat on the marble counter, treating it more like a common object than a collector's rarity. There, she said, her voice laced with venom. Now you've seen it. It's a 1960s Ethelred navigator. It costs $75,000. Do you understand the figure, sir? $75,000. She spaced out the words, her eyes demanding that the price alone should send him running. Mike ignored the taunt. His eyes went immediately to the watch, confirming the tiny, familiar scratch near the 4 o'clock marker and the subtle patina on the case that was unique to his grandfather's piece. He slowly extended his hand, his fingers moving carefully toward the display to simply observe the watch closer, to feel the emotional tether. That was all the excuse Lisa needed. Her face, already flushed from the effort of maintaining her rage, went fully crimson. To her, this was a clear violation, a movement from appreciation to possession, a theft in progress. The thought of a man in his clothes touching something so valuable ignited her profound, class-driven fury. The silence that had dominated Chronos Luxe was brutally cut by the sound of her unhinged scream, amplified by the boutique's perfect acoustics. Take your hands off that watch now. The shriek was a physical blow. It echoed off the polished counters and the glass walls. Every customer stopped breathing. Every one of the 5 salespeople, the uniformed men and women aligned perfectly behind the main counter, visibly recoiled. Lisa's arm was extended, her index finger pointed at Mike's chest, mere inches from his t-shirt. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, ugly indignation. The sheer force of the volume was meant not just to stop him, but to shatter his composure and publicly demolish his dignity. The hell had begun. The force of Lisa's scream, "Take your hands off that watch now," shattered the polished veneer of Chronos Luxe. The sound reverberated off the glass displays and the mirrored walls, amplifying the manager's rage and freezing every customer in their tracks. Mike Pierce didn't flinch. His hand, which had been reaching toward the 1960s Ethelred navigator, paused mid-air, a silent, defiant gesture against the verbal assault. Lisa didn't wait for a response. She barreled forward, propelled by a toxic mixture of classism and prejudice. "Honestly, look at you," she spat, sweeping her hand dramatically toward his simple gray t-shirt and dark jeans. "This is a luxury timepiece boutique, not a sidewalk clothing rack. You come in here dressed like you just finished washing cars, and you have the audacity to insist on touching a $75,000 vintage piece." Her voice was designed to carry, ensuring every ear in the boutique heard the brutal, public indictment. "Do you think we're stupid? You clearly have no intention of purchasing anything. You're wasting my time, you're wasting the time of my staff, and frankly, you're making my genuine clientele uncomfortable." The phrase genuine clientele hung in the air, a thinly veiled, racially charged accusation that needed no further explanation. She wasn't just questioning his ability to pay. She was questioning his right to simply exist in the space. She leaned in, her voice dropping slightly but maintaining its piercing pitch. "What is your real game here? Are you casing the joint? Because if you are, I've already called security. You don't belong here, and you certainly don't get to disrupt a legitimate business." The humiliation was a physical wave, but Mike received it like granite. His posture remained perfectly straight, his shoulders back, his expression a smooth, unreadable mask. He knew that any defense, any word of protest, would only validate her performance and give her more ammunition. He stood there, silent, allowing her words to hit the mirrored surfaces around them, the caustic comments ricocheting off the expensive glass, yet failing to penetrate his calm exterior. The watch, the real subject of the conflict, lay innocently on the marble between them. Behind Lisa, the 5 salespeople, 4 men and 1 woman, all dressed in identical navy suits, were pressed against the counter, their faces pale and ashamed. They watched the spectacle with wide, terrified eyes. They were professionals, trained in discreet, high-value sales, but they were also terrified of Lisa Clinton. She was a tyrannical manager known for her zero-tolerance policy regarding what she called non-contributing staff. They knew she was wrong, that her behavior was vile, but their need to pay rent outweighed their conscience. Their silence, however, only amplified Lisa's power, making them passive accomplices in the public shaming. They averted their gaze, focusing on the highly detailed wall calendars or the perfectly aligned brochures, anywhere but on Mike's impassive face. Lisa, fueled by the silence of her staff and the gasps of the onlookers, mistook Mike's stoicism for defeat. His lack of visible anger or shame only served to infuriate her further, as it denied her the satisfaction of seeing him break. She was used to people shrinking away from her rage. "Since you've decided to trespass and ignore my direct instructions," Lisa declared, retrieving her phone from her pocket, her voice now dangerously low and formal, "I'm going to take the next step. I have every right to remove non-clients causing a scene. You are leaving. Now, since you've decided to trespass and ignore my direct instructions," Lisa declared, retrieving her phone from her pocket, her voice now dangerously low and formal, "I'm going to take the next step. I have every right to remove non-clients causing a scene. You are leaving. Now." She had already dialed a number, presumably the boutique's private security line. The threat was not subtle. It was the final, devastating move in her attempt to dominate and erase Mike from her luxury domain. The silence was agonizing, broken only by the sharp, angry whisper of Lisa addressing the security operator. It was then, as Lisa turned her back slightly to confer with security, that one of the young salespeople, a man named Alara, shifted. Alara was the newest and lowest-paid member of the Chronos Luxe team, terrified of Lisa, but possessing a decency that hadn't yet been crushed by the job. He was positioned slightly apart from the other 4 frozen figures. He leaned forward just enough, his whisper barely audible over Lisa's phone call, a desperate plea of conscience. "Lisa, I don't think that's necessary," Alara murmured, his eyes flicking nervously between the manager's rigid back and Mike's composed face. "He hasn't touched anything. He just asked to see the watch." The manager whirled around, her features contorted into a snarl of furious disbelief. She didn't need to hear the exact words. The tone of dissent was enough. "Cala boca," she hissed, using a harsh Portuguese phrase for "shut up," which carried the weight of a threat in the silent, American boutique. "Do not interrupt me when I am handling a security issue. Get back to your station, now, or you'll be joining him on the unemployment line." Alara immediately retreated, his face hot with shame, but his brief, failed intervention was a crack in the wall of apathy. It registered with Mike. Mike watched the exchange, his eyes moving from the defeated salesperson to the enraged manager. This was the moment the game changed. Lisa had crossed the line from snobbery to actively threatening his freedom and the livelihood of a decent employee. His composure finally gave way to a cold, hard resolve. He spoke for the first time since the escalation, his voice low, measured, and powerful enough to cut through the remaining tension without needing to shout. "Miss Clinton," Mike said, using her formal name to re-establish a power dynamic she clearly believed was hers. He didn't raise his voice, but the sudden sound of his calm tone compelled her to silence her phone call and turn back to him. "You have been openly insulting me for 5 minutes, accusing me of theft, and threatening me with law enforcement based on absolutely nothing but the clothes I chose to wear this morning. You have also threatened the job of a subordinate who attempted to show basic courtesy." Mike paused, letting his gaze bore into her smug, aggressive confidence. He moved his hand, pulling his own simple phone from his pocket, the only thing that looked more out of place than his t-shirt. "Are you sure you want to handle this yourself?" he asked, his question not a request for clarification, but a final, loaded challenge. "Are you absolutely certain you want to be the sole decision-maker for what happens next in this boutique, with this product, and with your staff?" Mike's question, "Are you sure you want to handle this yourself?" hung in the pristine air, cold and challenging. It was a final courtesy, a loaded line thrown before the point of no return. Lisa Clinton, however, was deaf to nuance. She heard only a weak man attempting to deflect blame. The idea that this casually dressed black man could possibly pose a threat to her or her position was laughable to her prejudiced mind. She pulled her phone away from her ear, ending the call to security with an impatient tap, and fixed Mike with a predatory smile, the kind that showed far too much confidence. "I own this floor, sir," Lisa retorted, her voice regaining its arrogant, commanding pitch. "I decide who walks out of this store with an expensive watch, and I decide who walks out with security escorting them. Do you understand the difference? I am absolutely certain I want to handle this. You're simply a common time waster, and I'm calling a halt to your little show." Her confidence was a fortress built entirely of her own unchecked bigotry and entitlement. She was already mentally drafting the email to her regional director, justifying the removal of a disruptive element. Mike said nothing more. He reached into his jeans pocket and pulled out his phone. It wasn't a flashy, gold-plated device. It was a simple, sturdy model, dark gray and unadorned. The action itself drew another wave of contempt from Lisa, who likely expected a flashier device if he were truly wealthy. Mike's eyes, still fixed on the vintage Ethel-red Navigator watch lying on the counter, didn't move as his thumb quickly typed 2 or 3 words into the screen. The entire process took less than 5 seconds. He then quietly lowered the phone, placing it back into his pocket, his posture remaining perfectly upright and motionless. Lisa watched the action with mocking amusement, a deep, satisfied chuckle rumbling in her chest. She interpreted the text message as a desperate, final cry for help to a friend or family member, a final, pitiful act before defeat. "Oh, look at that," Lisa taunted, shaking her head dramatically. "Did you just text your friend to bring his allowance so you can buy yourself a plastic novelty watch instead? Or are you calling the police on yourself to save me the trouble? I've already contacted security, dear. You've lost this round." She folded her arms, radiating victory. "The clock is ticking. You have 60 seconds to walk out of my boutique before uniformed guards remove you." The air became thick with anticipation. The other 4 salespeople behind the counter exchanged terrified, hopeless glances, silently calculating the 60-second countdown. Mike, however, remained utterly still, perfectly balanced, his eyes closed for a brief, heavy moment. He wasn't waiting for guards. He was waiting for the immediate consequence of his message. The sound that followed was not the heavy tread of security boots, but the clean, electronic chime of the Chronos Luxe automated front doors swinging open. It happened exactly 1 minute later. The silence of the boutique was about to be broken by a very different, far more devastating force. The clean, electronic chime of the Chronos Luxe automated front doors swinging open was the sound of the timer expiring. Lisa, standing motionless and rigid with triumphant arrogance, expected to see the familiar, uniformed security guards she had just called. Instead, 3 figures entered the boutique. They weren't security. They were a trio of high-level executives, and every detail of their presence screamed overwhelming, quiet authority. Leading the group was a stern woman in her late 40s named Anika, whose tailored anthracite suit looked both conservative and impossibly expensive. Flanking her were 2 men, Kai and Silas, equally impeccable in their dark, bespoke Italian cuts. They moved with the silent, decisive grace of people who were accustomed to commanding rooms. They carried no shopping bags, no wallets out, just thin, leather-bound portfolios. Their demeanor signaled not interest in shopping, but interest in ownership. They were here for business, not pleasure. The entrance instantly shifted the atmosphere. The tension didn't lessen. It changed, moving from raw aggression to sharp, anticipatory dread. The other customers silently stepped away, recognizing the unmistakable aura of serious, high-stakes corporate power. Lisa Clinton, despite her intense focus on Mike Pierce, was a professional manager, and the sight of this caliber of clientele instinctively triggered her training. The anger that had been contorting her face vanished, replaced instantly by the practiced, dazzling smile of a luxury service veteran. She straightened her blazer, smoothed her skirt, and dropped her phone entirely. "Good afternoon," Lisa said, her voice now impossibly sweet, a perfect, seamless shift from venomous manager to welcoming host. She approached the trio, ignoring the man she had just publicly threatened. "Welcome to Chronos Luxe. How may I be of assistance to Ethelred executives today?" She recognized the subtle, embroidered crest on Anika's cuff, an internal emblem of a major investment firm. She assumed they were here to view a massive purchase or discuss a corporate partnership. Anika, the lead executive, didn't spare Lisa a glance, not even a nod. Her sharp, intelligent gaze swept past the manager, past the rows of glittering displays, and fixed directly on Mike Pierce, who was still standing calmly by the counter, the controversial 1960s Ethelred navigator lying between him and Lisa. Lisa's welcoming smile froze on her face, turning brittle and confused. Anika ignored her completely, walking straight toward Mike. The two men, Kai and Silas, stopped just inside the entrance, their presence sealing the exits. Lisa stood stranded halfway between the entrance and the counter, suddenly feeling the oppressive silence return, heavier and colder than before. She watched, her heart beginning a frantic, sick rhythm against her ribs, as Anika approached the man she had just called a trespasser. Lisa stood stranded halfway between the entrance and the counter, her manufactured smile turning brittle as she watched Anika, the lead executive, bypass her entirely. The expensive stillness of the store intensified, the air thick with impending catastrophe. Lisa's training failed her. Her mind was frantically trying to reconcile the executive's blatant disrespect for her, the store manager, with the presence of the man in the gray t-shirt. Anika stopped directly in front of Mike Pierce. The distance between the wealthy executive and the casually dressed man was zero, signaling an immediate, profound intimacy that was entirely incomprehensible to Lisa. Anika, without a word to Lisa, extended one hand, not in greeting, but as a gesture of acknowledgement and authority. "Mr. Pierce," Anika said, her voice a low, commanding alto that instantly cut through the silence. She spoke with the cold deference of someone addressing a superior. "We received your alert." The words struck Lisa like a physical blow. Alert? Mike's text message hadn't been a plea for help. It had been a summons. Anika paused, her gaze flicking down to the vintage Ethelred navigator watch lying exposed on the counter, and then up to Lisa's terrified, rapidly draining face. "Has there been an irregularity in the management of the new acquisition?" Anika finished, the phrase loaded with corporate menace. The store froze. The three high-level executives, Mike Pierce, and the entire clientele of Chronos Luxe held their collective breath. The 5 salespeople behind the counter, including the decent Alara, gasped audibly. They had watched their tyrannical manager publicly accuse a man of being a thief and a trespasser, and now a high-powered executive from Ethelred Global Investments was addressing that same man as Mr. Pierce and talking about an acquisition. Lisa Clinton's carefully applied makeup suddenly looked chalky. All the color drained from her face, leaving her features rigid with shock. Her throat contracted, making speech impossible. Anika didn't wait for an answer from the manager. She opened the leather-bound portfolio she carried, revealing a digital folder on a secure tablet. Without raising her voice, she made the announcement that simultaneously ended Lisa's career and concluded the scene. Effective as of 3 p.m. this afternoon, Ethelred Global Investments finalized the acquisition of the entire Chronos Luxe chain of boutiques, Anika announced, her words crisp and irrefutable. The majority shareholder, and the new principal of the holding company overseeing all operations, is Mr. Michael Pierce. The revelation was a sonic boom in the silent room. Mike Pierce, the man in the gray t-shirt, the one Lisa had accused of being a poverty-stricken trespasser and a petty thief, was the corporate entity that now owned the very store she managed. The power dynamic, which she had manipulated and abused minutes ago, had not just reversed, it had inverted, leaving her entirely exposed and powerless. Mike had not been trying to steal a $75,000 watch. He had been standing in his own store, looking at a sentimental piece, enduring the prejudice of his own employee. The irony was devastating. Mike simply nodded at Anika, confirming the statement, his eyes still fixed on the Ethelred navigator, his initial sentimental goal now framed by a victory more profound than any acquisition. The announcement from Anika that the man in the simple gray t-shirt, Mike Pierce, was the new majority shareholder of the entire Chronos Luxe chain, left the store in a state of catastrophic silence. Lisa Clinton stood paralyzed, her face an ash-gray canvas of shock, the only color remaining the frantic, desperate redness around her eyes. Mike finally broke the tension. He turned his attention fully from the watch to the manager. His gaze was cold, penetrating, and entirely devoid of the anger Lisa had tried so desperately to provoke. "Miss Clinton," Mike said, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of the immense, sudden power he wielded. "You didn't need to know my name, my title, or the size of my bank account to extend the most basic level of professional courtesy. You didn't need to know that I was buying a sentimental piece of family history, not an investment. You didn't need to know my title to treat me with respect." Lisa tried to speak, her lips struggling to form words. Mr. Pierce, I assumed. I sincerely apologize for the mistaken judgment." Her words were a pathetic, fractured stream of panic. Mike cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "It wasn't a mistaken judgment, Miss Clinton. It was a failure of character driven by prejudice. You assumed based on my skin and my clothing, and you chose humiliation and accusation over respect. That is not a mistake. It is a disqualification for leadership." He gave a small, decisive nod toward Anika. Anika, acting with the swift, impersonal efficiency of corporate law, didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the manager's whimpering excuses. "Lisa Clinton," Anika stated, looking down at the tablet in her hand, confirming the prepared documentation. "As the principal executive of the new ownership, Mr. Pierce has authorized me to inform you that your contract is terminated immediately for professional misconduct and discriminatory practices." Lisa's knees buckled. She reached out and gripped the marble counter, fighting to remain standing. The reality of losing her high-paying job in a moment of utter disgrace crashing down on her. Anika then lifted her gaze to address the remaining employees, the 5 salespeople still frozen behind the counter. As for the rest of the staff, Anika continued, her voice maintaining its sharp clarity. "We have observed the entire incident. The 4 individuals who stood silently by and allowed a hostile, discriminatory environment to flourish are also terminated, effective immediately, for complicity and failure to uphold corporate standards." For salespeople instantly lowered their heads, defeated, their shame now paired with ruin. Anika's eyes, however, then searched the group and stopped on the young man who had whispered an objection. "However," she announced, the contrast in her tone dramatic. "We have noted the conduct of one employee, Alara. Mr. Pierce was aware of your small act of decency and your attempt to intervene on behalf of a customer." Alara looked up, bewildered, tears forming in his eyes out of fear and confusion. "Effective immediately, Alara, you are promoted to a management track position within Ethelred Global Investments and will be transferred to our corporate headquarters for specialized training," Anika confirmed. "Your immediate compensation will reflect the new role. Your willingness to stand for respect, even at personal risk, is exactly the character we require." The contrast was absolute. Lisa and the silent majority were fired for their moral failures, while the one who showed courage and decency was instantly elevated. The resolution was complete, swift, and entirely dictated by the principles Lisa had so viciously violated. The shock of the simultaneous firing of Lisa Clinton and the 4 passive employees was physically painful. The silence in the boutique was now a cavern of shame and ruin. Lisa, her entire body shaking, fought to maintain her grip on the counter. Her arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a desperate, animal fear for her livelihood. She looked past Anika, past the stern executives, to the man who now held her fate, the man she had treated as less than nothing. "The watch," Lisa stammered, tears finally breaching her frozen eyes. The veneer of the powerful manager had cracked, revealing a begging, panicked woman. "Mr. Pierce, please. I have a family. I didn't know. The watch, please." Mike looked down at the 1960s Ethelred Navigator lying on the cold marble, the item that had triggered the entire, devastating confrontation. He knew that for her, the watch was merely a symbol of the wealth she coveted. For him, it was a legacy. Mike slowly reached out, his hand finally closing around the gold strap. "I will take it," he stated, his voice quiet and firm. He lifted the watch, his thumb tracing the familiar, tiny scratch near the 4 o'clock position. He didn't need to ask the price. He owned the inventory. Have it prepared for transport immediately. He paused, looking directly at the tear-streaked face of his former employee. It was my grandfather's timepiece, and now it is mine. He turned away from the devastated manager and the 4 disgraced employees, dismissing them entirely. He walked toward the exit, stopping briefly to nod at Alara, the young man who had found unexpected promotion through simple decency. As he reached the clean, automated doors of Chronos Luxe, Mike Pierce stopped one last time. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the store, the gleaming wealth, the terrified remaining customers, and the now broken managers slumped over the counter. He delivered the final, resonant message, his voice carrying the moral weight of the entire encounter, ensuring the truth of what had happened would reverberate long after he left. To all of you who watched and judged today, Mike said, his voice calm, clear, and utterly conclusive. The clothes on a person's back are merely fabric. The color of their skin is simply pigment. Never confuse the price of a suit with the true value of a person. Arrogance led to instant poverty here today, not ambition. Remember this always. Prejudice is the only poverty you can't afford. With that final statement, the new principal shareholder of the entire chain, the man in the simple gray t-shirt, walked out of the store, leaving behind a silence more profound and costly than any watch in the display case. The shame, the astonishment, and the final lesson were all that remained. And that is where the story of Mike Pierce and the Ethelred Navigator truly ends, not with the purchase of a watch, but with the purchase of a profound lesson. We leave Lisa Clinton standing amidst the ruins of her arrogance, having learned the hard way that true power is not found in a corporate title or the cost of a suit, but in the integrity and respect you show to every person you meet. So, tell us, if you were Mike Pierce, would you have simply bought the watch and left, or was the public firing the essential, dramatic justice this moment required? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful, true-to-life stories to light. Subscribe now and never miss a moment.